What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Between the Tackles podcast. I'm Burge. As always, please go on Apple, Spotify, where our show is located. Give us a 5-star review, comment, subscribe, follow. Do it all. It goes a long way to helping our show continue our growth, to build on what we have done this offseason. We appreciate all of you. Also, we're on the social medias. We're on X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at TacklesPod. If you're on Facebook only, that's fine too. Search Between the Tackles. You'll find all of our video clips and our shows on there. Please, again, subscribe, comment, like, download. We love interacting with you, and it goes a long way for helping our show grow. Back with Manish again. Manish, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, and I'm really happy to welcome CBS Sports senior reporter and analyst Dave Richard to the show today. Dave is a member of the Fantasy Sports Writers Association Hall of Fame. He's been one of the most respected voices in this industry for the better part of 3 decades, and now he's a multi-platform star on CBS. You can find his written work, of course, on CBSSports.com. You can see him on CBS HQ. And you can listen to him on my favorite podcast, Fantasy Football Today. Dave's also a member of the NFL draft team at CBS, breaking down prospects, doing really a terrific job of explaining how those prospects fit into the fantasy landscape. And I probably buried the lead. He was also the first fantasy football writer at NFL.com before joining CBS. I mean, as you can tell, I can't say enough great things about Dave, and I know that he will never actually toot his own horn. So welcome to the show, Dave.
I can't believe you know all of those things. My wife doesn't know all of those things. This is crazy.
Big fan, as they say.
Yeah, well, listen, I appreciate it, and I've had the pleasure of meeting you a number of times, and I'm always grateful for your support, Manish. So happy to be on the show with you and Burge. Great to meet you. Another boring NFL offseason. I don't know what the hell we're going to talk about.
Well, I want to jump right into it. In the wake of free agency, a few months ago we had one of your CBS colleagues, Aditi Kinkhabwala, on the podcast talking about the importance of choosing the right stats when discussing players instead of bombarding people with numbers. And I think one of the things that I've always admired and appreciated about your work, Dave, is that you have a great way of weaving pertinent data when talking about players and how they kind of fit in the fantasy world. So right off the top, in the wake of the free agency frenzy, what players' fantasy stock do you think rose the most? And of course, on the flip side, whose value do you think maybe took a hit, maybe a fantasy faller after the free agent chaos kind of subsided?
Well, I think the best way to go about this is maybe naming a big winner and a big loser. And then if you guys feel like it, we can go by position and we can talk about which players at each position were small winners, big winners, small losers, big losers. I love what's happening with Emeka Ebuka in Tampa. And you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, Emeka Ebuka, he was a rookie last year. He didn't change teams. He wasn't a free agent. He didn't get a bag. Mike Evans did. Mike Evans left Tampa. That's a free agent move. And I look at the Bucs as a unit. Offensively, I think they're good. Defensively, I think they could be really bad. And take yourself back to last year with the Dallas Cowboys, with the Cincinnati Bengals. These were teams. This is just 2 examples. Arizona Cardinals can be a third, if you can actually believe that. Teams that had good offenses, but their defenses were terrible. And that meant game scripts that forced a lot of passing, forced a lot of points to be scored. You want players on those teams. I think we saw enough from Ebuka in the first third of the year to know that he's really, really talented. And in the draft process, before the Bucs got him, he was one of the cleanest prospects in last year's class. And I can't help but think that in his second season, he'll put it all together and he'll be in a great situation where he will see upwards of 8 targets per game and just absolutely dominate. So I think that he's somebody that fantasy managers should sort of revisit as a player that's worth taking as a top 35 type pick in fantasy drafts, if catches count. If you're starting 2 receivers in a flex, 3 receivers in a flex, that's even better. But I think he's a huge winner. And I think he could end up being a receiver that we're talking about as a top 10 guy overall in 2027. As far as losers go, I don't know if there's like a huge loser, somebody that's like really, really just not going to see their stock be much better. But let's go with another second-year player. Let's go with R.J. Harvey of the Denver Broncos, who I didn't love him coming out last year in the draft process. I thought he was good, not great. He ended up being a second-round pick. Who am I to question Sean Payton and George Payton when they take a player in the draft? You've got to take notice, and especially when it's earlier than you thought it would be. And he ended up being okay toward the end of last year. It was when J.K. Dobbins was hurt, scored a bunch of touchdowns. But now Dobbins is back, and Jaylen Waddle is now a Denver Bronco. And I just wonder if those two pieces are enough to keep the lid on R.J. Harvey and how many stats he can be. I know that when the offseason started, he was somebody that was in my top 24 among running backs. Now he's not. And I'm nervous to reach for or even draft at fair value R.J. Harvey, because I think Denver's offense has continued to evolve, certainly as last season went on, but again, this offseason with Jaylen Waddle, who's also a winner, joining that team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good transition to go by position. But before we do, you just named two players on my dynasty salary cap roster there. Both R.J. Harvey and Emeka Ebuka are on my roster. So I got to take the good with the bad there, I guess. But yeah, let's start. Well, let's start with the running backs, which we just got finished talking about R.J. Harvey. What do you think of Kenneth Walker's impact, the big name, the Super Bowl MVP, moving on to play in Kansas City with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and that whole group?
I think ultimately it's going to be a good thing, Burge, because Kansas City really hasn't had a lead running back, a star running back, I'd say in 5+ years. And I know that people aren't used to having a Kansas City running back being an early round draft pick in fantasy and being a superstar in fantasy. In fact, there's only been one time in the last 5 years where a running back in Kansas City has finished top 15 or had even 12+ PPR points per game. I think that's below the floor for Kenneth Walker, provided that he stays healthy in Kansas City. He doesn't have the Zach Charbonnet problem anymore. Charbonnet was the one who was taking goal line carries away from Kenneth Walker, passing downs work away from Kenneth Walker. And yeah, I'm a little concerned about Walker having a lot of catches and playing on third downs. He's not a great pass protector. And Patrick Mahomes is going to need a pass protector. But with Mahomes coming back from injury, teams still playing a lot of too high against Kansas City, they need to exploit that. And instead of trying to draft somebody, because this draft class, it's got some solid running backs, not necessarily great running backs, Kansas City just simply decided to get Kenneth Walker, pay him. They don't have to use a draft pick. They didn't have to trade for anybody. And I think Walker, again, provided that he's healthy, can be in the neighborhood of 16+ touches per game. When he's done that before, that's 2022 to 2024. He had at least 13.3 PPR points per game. I think that's what we're looking for. Can he put up numbers like he did last year and score twice as many touchdowns? I think that's the floor. And that means like 13 PPR points per game is a floor. Ceiling, if everything works out, and the Chiefs really do have to run the football a lot, and defenses dare them to do that, well, now Kenneth Walker can take advantage, and he can finish the year as the top 10 type of fantasy running back. We will see him drafted in late round 2 by the time we get to August. And that's a change of tone for me. When he first went there, I thought, it'll probably be like a 3rd round pick. But you could slowly see yourself moving him up a little bit when you consider other running backs in that range, the Kyron Williams in the world who just aren't as exciting. Travis Etienne, that's how we're saying his name now, and we'll talk about him in a second. But he's not quite as great of a fantasy pick as Kenneth Walker. We're kind of running out of running backs when we're talking about guys that take in the first 2 rounds. And so Walker kind of gets pushed up there, and I think fantasy managers will be excited to take him now that he's on the Chiefs and not the Seahawks.
Now, on the flip side, in the Seattle with Zach Charbonnet, does he elevate now that Kenneth Walker's out of the picture, or do you see them drafting a guy?
I think they're going to draft a guy. I have no idea when Zach Charbonnet is going to be ready to play. Remember, he tore his ACL in January. It is very rare when a running back goes through that type of an injury and is ready to go for the start of the season. I would almost bet a mortgage payment that he'll start the year on the PUP list for Seattle. Seahawks have already added Emmanuel Wilson, who wasn't that bad for the Packers last year, but he's not a 1A type back. Yes, I think Seattle will draft a running back. That will be a very popular pick in fantasy leagues. And then Charbonnet, I think if you draft him, we're talking about a back half of the season type of player, and I bet his role will not grow from what it was last year because of the injury and because he's going to work his way back. Manish, we've seen it 100 times, right? Where a running back comes back from injury and the team takes their time with him, and it's not going to be a great pick. We're doing mock drafts already on CBSSports.com. We're actually doing another one tomorrow, Wednesday, the 25th, and I'd be shocked if he went late round 9, Charbonnet did, in our most recent mock, and that's full PPR. I would bet in a half PPR mock like we're going to do, that's going to be a round 10 type pick. And that's when I would start to look for Charbonnet at this point, Burge. If he ends up participating in training camp and it's a miraculous recovery, then of course we'll move him up the rankings. But at that point, until that point, I don't think we can do that.
Let's talk about Travis Etienne now. I'm going to have to get used to saying his name
Me
like
too.
that. I'm so ingrained to saying Etienne, and I'm going to have to get used to that. He goes to the Saints. What's your thought on that fit, and what does this mean for Alvin Kamara?
I don't know what it means for Alvin Kamara. I don't know if Alvin Kamara is playing, but if Kamara is still with the Saints and back in New Orleans, then I think we're talking about him as a part-time player and not the same type of fantasy asset that he was once upon a time. Etienne, and it is weird, right? Because Devon Etienne is also in there, and we're saying their name the same. I'm going to start saying Travis Etienne. That way people know exactly who I'm talking about. Okay, Travis Etienne, 2 of the last 3 years, at least 14.9 PPR points per game. And I really like New Orleans' offense. I liked their offensive line. I think they're going to add to their offense in the draft with a wide receiver. I think they're set at running back, and Etienne is the lead guy there. And he's just another case like Walker. As long as he stays healthy, he's going to have plenty of opportunities to go out there, put up numbers. I'm more excited about just workload overall and yardage than I am touchdowns. I don't see him being a big touchdown getter there. They could always add another back that can work short yardage. Shuck can work in short yardage. If Kamara's there and he's catching passes, that puts a cap on his upside. But by default, there aren't a lot of great running backs that you could say are reliable RB2 types. And so that's the range that Travis Etienne is going to be in, as an RB2 type who's going to go in that round 3-4 range.
Dave, I wanted to ask you about a guy who, didn't really gain headlines in the early part of free agency, kind of snuck in maybe in the beginning of week 2, but I think it was an intriguing addition for the Los Angeles Chargers, and that's Keaton Mitchell. Now, he's a guy who I have picked up and dropped more times than I can remember over the last several years, because every time I think he's going to be good, he gets injured. It's one of those, like, every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. I think that, Mike McDaniel loves speed. He obviously utilized that with Devon Etienne, and Mitchell isn't that caliber of player, but he does bring that element to an offense. So Omarion Hampton showed a lot of good signs at different points as a rookie. I think Vidal's still back. Of course, Najee Harris really never got off the ground. He's a free agent, probably won't be back, not part of the mix. But with McDaniel specifically, I thought that this was a very interesting ad by Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers. So what do you envision from a fantasy perspective out of Keaton Mitchell in a Mike McDaniel offense?
So I think he's going to matter more for the Chargers than he will for our purposes in fantasy, because Omarion Hampton's there, and he's also a terrific running back. When you saw him last year, he flashed a bunch, not just as a runner, but also as a pass catcher. We know that that's a big part of what Mike McDaniel asks his running backs to do. And so I would imagine that Hampton will be the lead back for the Chargers, even though he himself dealt with injuries last year. Mitchell, man, we're on the same page there, Manish. He's absolutely that type of player that you could see flourishing in a Mike McDaniel type of an offense. But I think he's there just as much for special teams as he is for offense. So if I'm in a league where there's points for return yardage, yeah, I'm putting a big star next to Keaton Mitchell's name on my rank list because I want to get him there in that role. But otherwise, I'm guessing he's going to be in that like 5 to 7 touch per game. And it might even be more like 3 to 6 touches per game, because you said it, they still have Vidal, and he's a solid running back. And Hampton, obviously, the big dog in that backfield, and he's young. So Mitchell, to me, I've got him on my Dynasty League team. I want him to break out and be a stud just as much as you guys do. But I don't think it's going to happen without a certain pathway with injuries taking part. Unless, he shows up in training camp, completely outplays Kamani Vidal. Vidal's cut, something like that. And then early on in the year, Hampton's banged up, and then we see Mitchell step up. late round pick at best who you're probably going to be cutting and then putting back on your team and then cutting again when you need that roster spot. It's going to be more of the same, Manish, with Keaton Mitchell, I'm afraid.
I want to turn the attention to the Pittsburgh Steelers and what happened in their backfield. Kenneth Gainwell really opened a lot of eyes. I'm a native Philadelphian, so I'm fully aware of what Kenneth Gainwell was with the Eagles. And I was a little bit surprised at how effective he was in an Aaron Rodgers offense, but he's gone now. They replaced him with Rico Dowdle, and Dowdle to me was one of the most maddening players in that there was that 3-4 week stretch where the guy was rushing for 200 plus yards, and then he kind of just disappeared again. Do you think that Steelers made an upgrade in swapping out Gainwell with Dowdle?
I don't know if I can say it's an upgrade. It's just a different type of running back. I think the one curious part about Gainwell joining the Steelers last year is it felt like there was some duplicity in his strengths with Jaylen Waddle's strengths. And so then the Steelers had two running backs that you could look at as interchangeable. They can both do the same things. And that's great for what the Steelers wanted, but it was terrible for fantasy managers. And as it turned out, Gainwell just ended up being the number one receiver for the Steelers by default. And that's a weird thing to say because it's not like he was a typical receiver. Just got a lot of targets from Aaron Rodgers, who didn't want to get hit, and so he'd get the ball out as fast as he possibly could, and Gainwell was his primary target a lot of those times. I don't think Dowdle, if you really asked Dowdle to catch a bunch of short throws, I think he could do it, but this is a new team, I can't say it's a new team, but it's a new coaching staff. Mike McCarthy knows Rico Dowdle. He's the one that brought him into the NFL. In 2024, he was Dallas's leading rusher with McCarthy as the head coach, and he averaged 13 PPR points per game that year. I would guess that Dowdle and Warren will begin the year splitting the rushing workload, and Warren will handle most third downs. That could switch if Dowdle ends up getting hot, like we saw him get hot last year. And remember, those games were against bad defenses without Chuba Hubbard healthy. So it was just a huge opportunity for Rico Dowdle, and he took advantage of it. If he were to start putting up numbers against the Ravens and Browns and Bengals, then yeah, I would imagine that Jaylen Warren will get pigeonholed into a smaller role and Dowdle will be the lead back there. So there's that type of upside with Dowdle. I just wouldn't draft him thinking, oh yeah, he's definitely going to be the guy in Pittsburgh. He might be the guy in Pittsburgh. And so if you want to talk about a mid-round pick on Rico Dowdle, I've got no qualms about it. And maybe Warren goes around 1 round ahead of Dowdle in terms of full PPR. If it's non-PPR, you might be able to make the case that Dowdle is just as good of a pick as Warren, in which case you just want the second Steelers running back. You don't want to be the first guy in your league to take a Steelers running back. You want to get the second guy.
On the flip side, with Kenny Gainwell going to the Bucs, how do you see that impacting Bucky Irving down there? Obviously, Bucky Irving was hurt last year, but he is the guy. And I personally have spent a lot of my salary cap in my dynasty league on Bucky Irving, and I'm a little worried.
If he can stay healthy, I think you're going to be really happy making that decision. The worry that you should have, though, is that if he gets even a little bit banged up, or if he makes a couple of mistakes, we know what Gainwell is capable of doing. I think Gainwell's there to just replace Rachaad White. Okay, and now that's a pretty big role. That's a third down role, and that means that Gainwell is going to get some targets too. If the Bucs season goes like I talked about earlier with you guys, that they're going to be chasing points in a lot of games, that's bad for Bucky. That's good for Gainwell. Sean Tucker's still there. Does this coaching staff really give Sean Tucker the goal line role again in 2026? That hurts Bucky. But the nice thing about Bucky is that he can make guys miss. He can turn an okay play into a big play, and he can get a lot of work. And it's the first few games of the year before he got hurt, he was averaging 18 PPR points per game. He was getting a lot of targets. I think he'll still get targets on first and second down. I like him in that exact same range that we were talking about for Travis Etienne. I almost called him Etienne again. He's behind Travis Etienne for me, but he's in that same range of like quality RB2s to begin the season. I would not reach for Bucky Irving. I'm a little scared that fantasy managers are going to start to take him earlier than they should. But if they do that and they pair him with Gainwell or they pair him with Sean Tucker with one of those later picks, it's probably going to work out okay.
Yeah, that injury is what sunk my season last year.
It
It
sunk the Bucks running game as well. There was a lot that went into it, and I just don't think he was ever really fully healthy until I don't even know if he was ever fully healthy, period, end of sentence, after the injury.
Yeah, I know we could probably have an entire podcast on running backs. I think Dave would love nothing more than talking about running backs for an entire hour. If you're unfamiliar, Dave is he's probably the last of the Mohicans. Much like me, I would always draft running back in the first 2 rounds, regardless of the format for way too long. But let's move on to wide receiver, Dave. A player you had mentioned earlier, Jaylen Waddle. Also, a particularly frustrating player, at least in my experience. The guy, shot out of a cannon as a rookie, high volume but low yards per catch. And then the following season, it was almost the opposite, where he was a big play threat. But throughout the course of his career, there have been times when he would consistently leave games, come back. Maybe it's a sprained ankle. Maybe, he doesn't necessarily miss an entire game, although that's happened as well. But it always felt that something was missing with him. You saw a dynamic element, of course, in his play. That's why, he was a top 10 pick. But now that Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos have him in their building, what do you think from a fantasy perspective he can become for Bo Nix? And just as tangentially, what does this mean for the other pass catchers like Courtland Sutton?
I'll start with the other pass catchers. It's bad news for all of them, and that includes Sutton. He's a loser. He was almost the biggest loser as far as fantasy goes this offseason, because we came to love him as a wide receiver 2 over the last couple of seasons with Bo Nix. And now that Waddle's there, I think it's a clear indicator that the Broncos want to evolve offensively, and they're going to be able to do that with Waddle, who, when healthy, can do anything you want. He can catch screens, make plays after the catch. He's a big-time yak guy. Manish, we've seen that. Burge, we've seen that. We know that it's going to continue to be the case. He can also win downfield. Go back and watch a lot of his targets from as recently as last year, and he was doing it. Is he the absolute fastest wide receiver? No. In fact, he played with one of those guys, and that's part of the reason why his numbers took a dip after he got off to such a strong start in his career. I think the Broncos can deploy him any way they want, and I think he can handle it any way they want. And when I think about Bo Nix, I think about how 2 years in the league, he's had a low ADOT. He doesn't challenge downfield as much as a lot of other quarterbacks do. He's looking to get the ball out fast. He's looking to be on the same page as his receivers. And if Waddle could be on the same page with Tua Tagovailoa, I am sure he can be on the same page on those in-breaking routes, horizontal routes, with Jaylen Waddle as well. And I feel like that was missing from Denver's offense last year. I think they tried to make it happen with Troy Franklin. And at one point, I fell for it. I thought Troy Franklin was their best receiver. Troy Franklin did not end up being their best receiver. Marvin Mims couldn't handle the job. And Courtland Sutton, big, rangy perimeter receiver. Pat Bryant, kind of the same thing. I think Bryant could play in the slot, but I don't think he's the best fit there. I think that Waddle is just going to be that piece that they draw up plays for and they utilize in different ways every week, but it ends up with 7+ targets game after game. Number 2 wide receiver, he does have the upside. Things really have to break right, but he does have the upside to get north of 8 targets per game. And again, this is a situation where everything breaks right. Denver's running game remains a mess. Courtland Sutton takes a step back. None of the other guys on the team take a step forward. Evan Ingram doesn't take a step forward. And the Broncos just find themselves feeding Jaylen Waddle. And in that type of a situation, the sky's the limit. He could have triple-digit catches, big-time yardage, and close to 10 touchdowns.
Does he sneak in a full PPR? Does he sneak into late round 2, or are you looking at him as a round 3 or 4 guy?
There are enough players at wide receiver, running back, and tight end where I don't think we'll see Waddle sneak into late round 2. And in the most recent mock we did, I took Waddle in late round 3. I took him ahead of Ebuka at the time, and now that after I've reflected a little bit, I don't think I would do that again. But I also took him ahead of Mike Evans. I took him ahead of Ladd McConkey. I took him ahead of Devontae Adams. And I could see myself doing that again. It's not necessarily because of the ceiling that I talked about, although that is nice. Listen, all those other receivers I named, they've got high ceilings too. Mm-hmm. It's just the floor with him and the fact that 7 targets per game in an offense that can be tailored to him as the number 1 guy. He doesn't have to worry as much about other players there taking work away. And I'm really just not a big believer in that Denver run game. And one other thing is, think about the cornerbacks in the AFC West that are going to be defending Jaylen Waddle. I mean, the Chiefs just got rid of a couple of their guys.
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think that there's going to be great divisional matchups for Jaylen Waddle, and that's going to be a huge, huge factor that helps him put up numbers. So I'm sold on him as like, let's call him a top 20 fantasy wide receiver, and that's in full PPR. He might be on the fence of 20 to 24 in a non-PPR, but safe floor, big ceiling. A lot of other receivers have that, but he's in a good spot.
Let's move on to another big name receiver who hasn't been traded yet, but very well could be traded. And if you don't know, Manish is a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I am a New England Patriots fan. So we've had some good debates about Mr. A.J. Brown. From a fantasy perspective, what's better for A.J. Brown owners? Is it better that he remains an Eagle and continues to play with Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni in that operation? Or is it better for him to go to his former coach, Mike Vrabel, play with the MVP runner-up Drake May in a evolving, growing operation in New England?
It's New England. I think it's a better
Yes.
downfield thrower and an offense that probably would be more willing to throw at a higher rate. I think Philadelphia, I think they know their identity at this point. They don't want to be a team that throws the ball a ton if they don't have to. Saquon Barkley can definitely still play. That offensive line still is good enough. I know it's an older offensive line. I'm not trying to throw shade at them by saying that. They're still, let's call them still a top 10 type of offensive line in the league. Patriots don't have that. They don't have a top 10 offensive line at this point, but they do have a quarterback that can keep plays alive just as well as Hurts and throw well on the run, as we saw from May in most of his games, not necessarily the Super Bowl. And I think if A.J. Brown's there, I think the target competition isn't the same like it is in Philadelphia, and the opportunities should be higher there than they would be in Philadelphia. So as a fantasy manager, I would love to see A.J. Brown go there.
Love to hear that.
Yeah, you can say if the Patriots have a better quarterback. That's fine. But that's okay. I
said a better thrower.
No, I agree. I think that the Patriots have a better quarterback. Just objectively speaking, I want to circle back to the Steelers, real quick for a moment. I thought the Michael Pittman trade was interesting. I do think he's a good player. I don't know, does he complement DK Metcalf well? To me, they're both big-bodied guys. DK is obviously a fast player, but it doesn't seem like DK Metcalf needed a Mike Pittman next to him. What's your read on that?
My read on it is I think the Steelers knew they needed anybody to be a number 2 wide receiver, because when this offseason started, Calvin Austin was walking out the door and he's barely a number 2 wide receiver. And I love Romeo Wilson. I think he's a fantastic route runner, but he's had a hard time staying healthy, and he's probably going to be pigeonholed into the slot in Pittsburgh, and that's just going to be it for him, and he won't be a huge target getter. The tight ends are changing, and the offense is changing, and it's going to be Mike McCarthy and what he does. I think what Michael Pittman does well is just he plays like a power forward, big body. He can move on one cut and get open that way, or he can win your jump balls. And I think the Steelers just needed anybody opposite DK Metcalf for defenses to have to deal with. And I do not think it means great things for Michael Pittman's fantasy numbers. He's another fantasy loser. He's coming off of a year where he averaged almost 12 PPR points per game. I'd be surprised if he gets there. In fact, he averaged 11.9 in Indy. DK averaged 12.1 in Pittsburgh. And now they're both on the same team in the Steelers, and it's a different type of offense. I don't think it's going to – I don't think the pace of the offense is going to change that much. I don't see Aaron Rodgers holding the ball a long time, game after game after game. I feel like we're seeing a Steelers offense that's going to be still slow-paced, still would prefer to run the football, and still when Rodgers throws the ball, he's not going to be holding it for 3 seconds, 3.5 seconds, unless dudes are covered. And I think that both Metcalf and Pittman, again, they can kind of do the same things. You could kind of tell yourself, well, they're never fully covered because they're so big and they can leap up for the ball, or they can adjust and be out front for a pass that's out in front of them. I don't see either one of them being great for fantasy this year. Metcalf may be more of a number 3 receiver at best, and I think people are going to draft him because they know his name and they say, "Oh, it's DK Metcalf, and he's fast and he's big." But I don't know if that necessarily means that he should be a priority on draft day. And Pittman's going to be a name that fantasy managers know as well. I think he's even less of a priority at this point, and back half of draft type of wide receiver that you put on your bench and you use as a bye week replacement. I would tell you this, names like Romeo Doubs are ahead of both of these guys. Ricky Pearsall, who, man, what a disappointment he ended up being last year. I thought he'd break out. I'd still take him ahead of both of these guys. You can make the case that Josh Downs, who was a teammate of Michael Pittman in Indianapolis, he's better than Pittman going into this year, and he might even outperform DK Metcalf, or at least keep it close if we're talking full PPR. So neither of these wide receivers are going to be guys that I'm going to chase after.
Now, on the flip side, Pittman's counterpart on his former team, Alec Pierce, got himself a lot of money this offseason. With Pittman out of the mix there, does do Pierce's numbers elevate?
I think they do, because look at how he got his numbers in fantasy. It was a lot of big plays, certainly a bunch of touchdowns. He averaged 5.6 targets per game and still had 12.2 PPR points per game. 12.2 is basically exactly what DK Metcalf had. In fact, it's a tenth of a point higher per game than what DK Metcalf had. And let's just use a little logic here. This Colts offense has a Pierce. They just paid him a lot of money. Tyler Warren, they just made him a first-round draft pick. Josh Downs, good slot receiver, and that's pretty much going to be it. So maybe some peripheral receivers could combine for 4 targets per game amongst them all. I think Pierce sees an uptick in targets, and he could see, we could call it 6.6 targets per game. And I think that that's going to be a good number for him. And I'm rather convinced that Alec Pierce is more than just a deep ball guy. And I think we'll see him used more in that intermediate area that Pittman was used in. And I think he'll be pretty good in that area. And so while I can't look at him and say, yeah, that's a surefire top 20 fantasy receiver, and I would take him in the same range as Jaylen Waddle. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I do think he is the type of receiver that we can draft for value. And we can take him as a number 3 receiver, and it wouldn't surprise me if he finished the year, and especially in half and non-PPR leagues, that he finishes the year as a top 24 type of wide receiver, because the role should expand. The run game is still going to be the big thing in Indianapolis. Obviously, that's a hindrance. But I don't know how much running Daniel Jones is going to do. And coming back from that Achilles injury, he might end up throwing a little bit more, and Pierce will benefit from that.
Not to mention even his broken leg that he was dealing with, before that happened.
That's when the whole season went down for Indianapolis. Yeah. It wasn't the Achilles; it was the fractured fibula that I'm playing on that. That's crazy. But the numbers went down for everybody once that happened.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your colleague at CBS, Pete Prisco, is also a big believer that Alec Pierce has more to offer than he has to this point in his career. I'm going to ask you, point blank, just moving on to another guy who has not been a number 1 receiver, but may actually be asked to fill that role with his new team, and that's Wan'Dale Robinson. Reunited with Brian Daboll with the Tennessee Titans now. Are you a believer in him? Is he anything more than a wide receiver 3 from a fantasy perspective?
As long as it's full PPR, I would argue that he's in the exact same boat as Alec Pierce, where we're going to draft him as a number 3 wide receiver, but the numbers are what they are, and he could end up finishing as a number 2 wide receiver. This is my favorite stat about Wan'Dale Robinson. He has averaged 8.2 targets per game in his last 38 games with Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, because there were a few games where Kafka was running the show, Daboll got fired. I can't help but look at this Titans offense and say, yeah, they're a little bit better, but they're still going to have to throw the ball a lot. And here's a reliable short area receiver who knows the offense. He will be in the right spot for Cam Ward. He will make himself available when Cam Ward is scrambling around, which Cam Ward is known to do. And he will continue to see a lot of targets because it's Brian Daboll, because it's this offense, and because those two work together. So as long as Brian Daboll believes in Wan'Dale Robinson, I will believe in Wan'Dale Robinson, and I'll take Robinson ahead of Alec Pierce in full PPR.
Interesting. Final wide receiver before we move on to the other positions, a guy who did not get a long-term contract but was franchised in Dallas, George Pickens. Now, he's a guy who's got the attitude, the attitude issues over the course of his career, can be a little bit hot-headed. Do you see him being able to repeat what he did last year in terms of continuing to grow on that? Or should somebody like me who has to make a decision whether I want to give him a big contract in Dynasty look to trade or move on?
I think you should see what you can get in trade for him and see if someone else is going to give you what a top 8 wide receiver would be in fantasy, because he's 25 years old and there's a lot of upside with him. But I don't know if he's a top 8 type of wide receiver. I'm going to get nitpicky here because I think he's top 12. I think Dallas is going to throw the ball enough that it'll justify early round picks for both Lamb and George Pickens. But when Pickens was playing with Lamb last year, it was 12 games and throw out week 18. It was 16 PPR points per game. That's pretty good, but it's not top of the top, if you get what I'm saying. And I know the Cowboys defense is going to be better this year. Will it be so much better that it will reduce targets for both Lamb and Pickens? I guess there's a chance of that, but I'm not really buying that. I think it's going to be more of the same for the Cowboys, and that means more of the same for Pickens and for Lamb. And it wouldn't surprise me if they both ended up around 15 PPR points per game. So neither one's going to end up being a superstar, except for the games where the other guy's hurt. And we already saw that last year. Remember when Lamb got hurt? George Pickens went crazy. He had a couple of 30 burgers. They were awesome. And the inverse would be true. If Pickens missed time, Lamb would be awesome. I don't think that'll happen as much when they're both on the field, but they'll both be good for your fantasy team. So, yeah, if you can get a haul for George Pickens in Dynasty where you don't have to give him a new contract and commit to him for 3, 4, 5 years, I would say do it. But if the offers aren't there, then stick with them and expect 15 to 16 PPR points per game.
I can live with that. I can live with that. Let's move on to the quarterbacks. There was some quarterback movement this year in free agency. Let's start with a guy who a few years ago was a pretty darn good fantasy quarterback. That's Kyler Murray with going on to the Vikings this year. Now he's got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison there, but there's some questions about what's going to happen with J.J. McCarthy and all this. So what do you think that his impact will be with the Vikings, and how will that translate to fantasy?
I think it'll be positive, because the only quarterback that's been terrible under Kevin O'Connell, and even he wasn't entirely terrible the whole time, but, I mean, he was pretty bad, was J.J. McCarthy. That list includes Kirk Cousins, as you know, he was great. Josh Dobbs literally was like traded midweek to the Vikings and then ended up doing well. Nick Mullins had some big games. Carson Wentz last year, his fantasy production wasn't necessarily great, but boy, he did wonders for the receivers in Minnesota. And so I can't help but think and give the benefit of the doubt to Kevin O'Connell that Kyler Murray can be salvaged and they can turn him into a capable thrower for those wide receivers. Now, does that mean that Kyler Murray is about to be a fantasy superstar? You referenced the numbers that he had in 2020 and 2021 when he came into the NFL. Well, since then, he's been around 20 to 21 fantasy points per game, and that's in 6-point per passing leagues. I think he can be a layer better than that. So maybe in that 22 fantasy point range on a per game basis. But we're living in a world where there are a lot of quarterbacks that can do that and more. And that pushes Kyler Murray outside of the top 12, but it's close. So I think we're going to see Kyler Murray get drafted, but he's going to be drafted as one of those high-end number 2 QBs. Maybe fantasy managers will take Kyler Murray and Patrick Mahomes, because Mahomes is going to go late because of the injury. And if they do that, then, okay, Kyler's their starter until they're comfortable to start Mahomes. And then either when Kyler stinks or Mahomes ends up being great, then they move on to Mahomes as their quarterback. Kyler rides the bench. Maybe they're both great, and you can trade one of those quarterbacks. There's definitely going to be some strategy involved with taking a second quarterback this year, because there are so many quarterbacks that could end up being helpful for fantasy managers in 2026, just like Trevor Lawrence was in 2025, just like Drake May was in 2025. Those guys were not early or mid-round picks. They were more middle to late-round guys. You usually took a second quarterback with them. Some people might have taken May and Lawrence and just began the season figuring out which one was the best, and then it was Drake May early on and then Trevor Lawrence toward the end of the year. You probably won your fantasy league, or at least made the playoffs, if you had that combo. I think Kyler can potentially be part of a combo that can help fantasy managers out who don't want to take a quarterback with an early round choice.
The next guy is a guy that I am staying as far away from as possible because I can't stand the team that he's on because they're so bad. It's Geno Smith. He's now back with the team that drafted him. I'm asking this question's more for the impact on his targets like Garrett Wilson. What's his ceiling with Geno Smith throwing him the football? Is it better than Justin Fields, or is it comparable? I personally lean to think that it's going to be more comparable because I think the Jets are going to stink next year.
Well, if it's comparable, that's good because in 5 games, and this is the first 5 games of the year for Garrett Wilson, and most of that was with Justin Fields. He was averaging 19 PPR points per game, and it's all because he had a ton of targets. He was getting almost 10 targets per game, and I don't see that changing at all. I think the Jets are going to be chasing points in a bunch of games. At bare minimum, they'll be in competitive games, if not chasing points, I should say that. And either way, that means Garrett Wilson's going to get targets. I think it's going to be a slightly better quality of target from Geno Smith than it would be from Justin Fields. And although the offensive line in New York isn't necessarily great, they do have some good players on that offensive line. It's going to be worlds better than what Geno Smith had to deal with in the second half of the year in Las Vegas. And I think that offensive line is really to blame, not only for Geno and the slope that he slid down, but also Ashton Genty, Brock Bowers, everybody who sort of disappointed fantasy managers last year. Yeah, it was that offensive line that kind of capsized everything for the Raiders. And at least at the beginning of the year, that shouldn't be the case for the Jets. I think Geno is a little bit better of a quarterback than he showed in the second half of last year. And I do think it'll be good for Garrett Wilson. I would draft him ahead of that group of Ebuka, Waddle. Who else did we talk about in that group? McConkey, Mike Evans. Like to me, in full PPR, he belongs ahead of that group because he's going to get so much volume. It's a little bit of a different story. If the catches don't count for anything, he'd probably be in the middle of that group, but still somebody who I think can put up numbers.
It's just something about me that I can't rely on the New York Jets with my fantasy football. There's something about it.
I get it.
I wanted to ask you one tight end question. It's the sleeper tight end, 3 years running for me. I've literally drafted him every single year, and he is disappointed every single year. Much like Keaton Mitchell, it's actually a former teammate of Keaton Mitchell's, and that's Isaiah Likely. He's getting reunited with John Harbaugh. On paper, another weapon for Jaxson Dart. We'll see how Malik Nabers kind of rehabs, the torn ACL that he had last year. But is this finally the year, Dave, that Isaiah Likely can actually be a week in and week out starting tight end?
I'd be surprised if he's a week in and week out fantasy starter. I am certainly not going to be surprised to see him get drafted as one of the first or a top 12 tight end. That's kind of because there just aren't 12 tight ends that fantasy managers can look at and say, yeah, that guy's a stud, that guy's a stud. We know who the first 5 guys are going to be off the board in every single draft. 3 of them were rookies last year. The other 2, Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, those guys are studs. You can lock up those 5 guys. And behind them, there's going to be maybe 3 or 4 other tight ends that are going to be surefire. That's going to be your Sam Laporta, your Tucker Kraft. I think people are going to start to rally back to Kyle Pitts. They'll be excited about Kenyon Sadiq. He's going to be a rookie. And then after that group, when you're just looking to find somebody to just be my tight end to begin the year, as long as the schedule is okay, I will throw the dart at Isaiah Likely. And really, when he's had opportunities, when he's had targets in games, he's been good. 9 career games, only 9, where he's had 6 or more targets, and he's had 12.5 plus PPR points in 8 of them. Man, that's good. And you'd love to, if we knew going into the year, Isaiah Likely is going to get 6 plus targets a game. If we knew that, he might be 6th for me. I'd be super excited about that. But we don't know. And there's a lot we don't know about the Giants offense. We don't know if Malik Nabers is going to be ready to go. We don't know if Darnell Mooney is going to be healthy. Last year, Mooney was impacted by an injury. And man, that ruined his year, but the year before he was pretty good. So there are a ton of questions in New York about their entire offense and really their receiving game. Theo Johnson could be a factor. And so because of all those questions and because Isaiah Likely has been 1 week great, 4 weeks sucky, 1 week great, another 4 weeks terrible, I think fantasy managers are going to be hesitant to even think about him. But I do think he's draftable as a top 10 tight end and somebody that you'll begin the year with as your starter. And here's one other thing. Let's say you're one of those fantasy managers that doesn't get 2 quarterbacks. You manage to get a great value on, a top 5 QB. You know those names. Well, now you might have that roster spot open up to take 2 tight ends, and Likely should be one of those 2 tight ends because he's got the upside to be a top 6 guy.
So I want to move this into talking about some formats for fantasy football. I am a almost solely dynasty salary cap I don't know how familiar you are with the whole salary cap, with the way that works. It's like I call it like the ultimate nerd fantasy football. Like I want to sit here and feel like I'm controlling an NFL team, and I got to
Sure.
manage all this stuff.
That's why we play.
One of my big things. I have a $500 salary cap. I got 20 roster spots to fill. It's basically your standard, quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, flex, and a tight end and a defense. I got Jalen Hurts on my roster, and I know how Manish feels about Jalen Hurts. I've heard him talk about him ad nauseum this season. Another reason why I feel like my team kind of sank, because I invested a good chunk of money in a quarterback, and I don't usually do that. Now, I can get out of this $50 contract on this guy to move on. Should I ride it out with Jalen Hurts one more season to try to, and again, I'm competing. I'm trying to win. I'm not like rebuilding, going for draft picks or anything like that. Do I ride it out with him, or do I see what I can get elsewhere? There's other options. I don't have the full list in front of me, but Jalen Hurts it's scary. The way I hear Manisha's poisoned my brain on Jalen Hurts. All right. He's poisoned my brain on it, and he's got me second guessing myself.
It's a question that follows with another question. And this is one thing that I learned from Amy Trask, who is a former executive of the Raiders, and she works with us at CBS Sports, and she's taught me a lot. And so my question to you would be, okay, you're going to trade away Jalen Hurts, and then what? What are you going to do at quarterback? What's your plan? And so I'm asking you, Burge, what are you going to do?
I will plug and play. I'm one of those guys that will stream a quarterback if I need to. I don't emphasize as much value on the quarterback position as I do with running back and wide receiver, because I've got a really good setup of my running backs and wide receivers with Ebuka and Pickens and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs. I got a good setup there, so I can kind of save some money and try to go out and make a trade for a different guy, because there's going to be other guys out there. I could go out and get Matthew Stafford to plug and play in there, somebody like that.
So back to the details of your league, and this is where everybody watching is going to zone out for 5 seconds. So let's try not to have that happen.
Yes,
but
yes.
When dynasty leagues are dynasty leagues, but the variation that you have of it being a salary cap league, if you trade Jalen Hurts, does somebody else in your league have to pay out the rest of that contract?
Yes,
Okay.
It moves. Yeah.
So you're never going to get anything remotely close to fair if Jalen Hurts is going to take up 10% of somebody else's salary cap. And there's got to be other quarterbacks in the league that are going to play for less, and other competing teams have those quarterbacks. They're not going to be as interested in Jalen Hurts. So in order to move Jalen Hurts, you need to find somebody in your league who believes their window to win is open now and doesn't have a quarterback and has space to absorb the Jalen Hurts contract and likes Jalen Hurts and has never heard Manish talk in his entire life. So I feel like that's going to be a tough needle to thread.
It's going to be a tough one.
And with that being the case, here are your options. Trading him and getting nothing for him, I don't see that working out really well.
No.
And, there's always the bounce back for Hurts. He's still under 30. I don't know how many more years you have him at the $50 price tag, but maybe he bounces back. I think we could still say that he's a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. And so if your window to win is now, I don't see him hurting you, especially if you've already got the cap situation balanced, managed, because you've got him for 50 and you've got all these other players. I don't think you're in a position where you have to move him, and he can still be your quarterback. You could also try and just acquire a second quarterback on the cheap. You mentioned Stafford. I think in dynasty leagues, fantasy managers that have Stafford, especially if they already have another quarterback, they would be delighted to move him after the year that he just had. And I still think he's got another good year in him. And I don't know what his cap number would be or anything like that. Obviously, that's just specific to your league. But this is the type of thinking that fantasy managers have to do whenever they make any type of trade, whether it's dynasty or redraft. You've got to think about, okay, what am I trying to accomplish, and what am I going to do after I accomplish what I'm trying to do? And so as long as you keep those thoughts in mind, you can go out there and try and make a deal, but I think it's going to be difficult for you. My guess is that Jalen Hurts is going to be your quarterback next year.
I just should have never started this podcast with Manish, and my brain would not be second guessing this one at all.
Dave, I wanted to, before we wrap up, I did want to ask you about the 2026 NFL Draft. You are part of the NFL Draft team at CBS Sports. I really enjoy your draft profiles because you do kind of talk about the impact that these players will have from a fantasy perspective. And I think you have a little bit of explaining to do because one of your more recent articles is on USC wide receiver Makai Lemon, and your NFL comp for him is Jaxson Smith in Jigma, JSN, who this week became the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history. What do you see in Lemon that draws that comparison? Why do you think they're similar? And what can we realistically expect out of the shoot? I know team and opportunity plays a massive role in fantasy, but as we stand now, a few weeks before the draft, what do you see as a realistic expectation for him as a rookie? And again, why the JSN comparison?
Well, the JSN comp comes from polished wide receiver who catches everything, can make plays after the catch, and isn't necessarily a burner, isn't necessarily the biggest, strongest guy in the world. JSN has stepped up over the last 2 seasons, in part because of his own talent, but also because of the utilization, and especially last year, the way that he was used in Seattle and the way that that offense worked. Fantastic for Jaxson Smith and Jigba. And I'm not saying that somebody should draft Makai Lemon and expect him to be exactly like Jaxson Smith and Jigba, but I think stylistically they're very similar. They can line up anywhere. They can catch anything. They're both great route runners. In the case of Lemon, I think he's tough. I think he's a nasty player. I think he's physical on top of being, blessed with good hands, especially since they're not big hands. I was so surprised to learn at the Combine that he didn't have big hands. He's actually got undersized hands, but he has 3 drops over 175 targets in his past 2 seasons. He was the Biletnikoff winner. He was the best receiver in college football last year. He's great working downfield. He's a great route runner. He can exploit zone coverage. He's a smart wide receiver who can be a high-volume earner for an NFL team, and that's exactly what Jaxson Smith and Jigba became in Seattle. And so I could absolutely see Lemon being the exact same thing for New Orleans, for example, where right now they've got Chris Olave. Olave had a great year last year, but boy, they could use another wide receiver to take some pressure off of him. Lemon could be that guy, and Lemon could actually potentially out-target Olave 2 years from now, just like JSN out-targeted his teammates in Seattle last year, and I believe the year before as well. So there's definitely great upside for Lemon. I know everybody's kind of freaking out about how he talked at the Combine, and maybe there's a little bit to that, and maybe there is something that coaches are going to have to work on him with. I'm not talking about when interviews, but just as far as, communicating. But I do think that he's among the most polished receivers in this draft class. You don't have the injury issues that you have with Jordan Tyson. You don't have the explosive issues and the versatility issues that you might have with Carnell Tate. Tate's pretty explosive. I probably shouldn't have said that, but the versatility is certainly a factor. I like Tate a little bit better, but Makai Lemon is probably going to be my number 2 receiver when it's all said and done.
Which prospect are you most excited about? Now, obviously the landing spot and the opportunity means a lot for this. So obviously, things will change after the NFL draft, but which prospect would you say, if you had to pick one, who are you most excited about coming in from a fantasy perspective?
Lemon would probably be that guy, but if I can go back to a player that I saw at the Senior Bowl who I was very excited about, it was Mike Washington Jr., the running back from Arkansas, who was great running the ball during practices and then in the game. And obviously at Arkansas, he did the exact same thing. He also flashed as a wide receiver multiple times. Every day he was making good catches at the Senior Bowl, and he's improving as a pass blocker. He's got good size to him. I'm reasonably optimistic that he can end up as either a very good 1B or a good 1A running back in the National Football League. And it also wouldn't surprise me if he was the second running back off the board after Jeremiah Love in the draft.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. There's a school of thought that maybe the first 2 running backs off the board will both be from Notre Dame with Jadarian Price, but it depends on, it's about, what it's about, Dave. It's about fit, need, coaches, and just my experience through the years. Coaches look at college prospects through a much different lens than general managers and scouts. They kind of hop on board at the end of the evaluation process and then fall in love with guys. And, sometimes it works. And fascinating. We could talk for hours about fantasy football, about the upcoming draft. It's just great insight. I love, hearing your perspective. It was great having you on the show, and I'd urge everybody to, again, check out Dave's work on CBSSports.com. You can see him on CBS HQ. And again, my favorite podcast, Fantasy Football Today, the first podcast that my 16-month-old son has ever listened to. So there's that in our family.
Yes.
You can also follow Dave on X at Dave Richard. Again, Dave, I can't thank you enough. You're, one of the most knowledgeable, respected, and as I said from the very beginning, humble people in this industry. And we're just really grateful that you came on and shared out all the information.
How many beers do I have to buy you in exchange for you saying that? I forgot. Was it 10?
I'll take that offline. I'll ask you.
Okay. What age are you going to let your son play fantasy?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, if it was up to me, as soon as he's aware, so I would say aware of what's happening, probably eight or 9. I have friends who have children who are much older, and I think they started around 10 with their own friends. And, maybe their fathers helped them along the way. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a big part of his life. Hopefully, he's got a little bit more success than his dad has had as a fantasy football manager. But Dave, I mean, you've got kids, and it's just another element and way that you can connect with your kids. Obviously, I want him to go out and play sports, but fantasy football, since I was a teenager, has been a big part of my life, and that's why, again, I really respect and appreciate the information that you provide, because it's not just about fantasy football. You have such a depth and breadth of knowledge in the sport that you're able to connect, what's happening in quote unquote real life football and adapting that to what fantasy managers can use in playing this game.
And that's the secret, because fantasy is a different game than the National Football League and what we see on TV. And you've got to be able to adjust and think that way when it comes to putting your fantasy team together. So we're giving out all sorts of tidbits here. What to do about making trades and what to think about.
I kind of even buried one of the cooler things about Dave is that he has a fantasy trade chart, which is I think the first time I had ever heard of a fantasy trade chart was with Dave. I don't even know if anyone else in the industry does it. I think that's really cool. It's a great conversation piece when you're debating, moving players with other people in your league.
It's great until I get an email or a tweet from somebody. Hey, 2 weeks ago you had this guy at this value, and now he's at that value, and now my trade sucks, and I'm the laughing stock of my league because of you, and I'm never going to look at your trade chart again. And
lack of accountability.
Yeah, now I know how stockbrokers feel. When they start recommending a stock and then the market tanks or what have you, and they've got people calling them up and yelling at them because it costs them money. Now I know what they go through because of that chart. But yeah, started it almost 20 years ago, Manish, and it's still going strong. That's on CBSSports.com during the football season. Don't make any trades without it.
It's great content all around. You and your colleagues. I'm also a huge believer and fan of Jamie Eisenberg, Heath Cummings. Adam Azer does an unbelievable job as the Fantasy Football Today podcast host. It's just it's a terrific listen. I listen to it, before I go to sleep. I listen to it when I'm on a run. I'm in the car. It's just again, it's easy listening. It's informative, and that's just to complement all the stuff that you guys do on CBS HQ and on the website as well. So check all that information out. Dave Richard, a living legend in the fantasy sports landscape, one of my favorite people in the industry. We can't thank you enough for being on today.
Dude, it was a blast. We should do this again sometime before the season starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, guys, subscribe, download, give us a 5-star review if you're enjoying the podcast. We're also on TikTok, Instagram, @TacklesPod. And we're trying to grow our presence on YouTube, so subscribe. A lot of great content coming, a lot of great guests on the way this off season. And that'll do it for now for Burge and for Dave today. I'm Manish. We'll talk to you next time on Between the Tackles.